generalized graph of the reabsorption of glucose in order to demonstrate how protein-mediated renal transport can reach saturation. Mark on the graph where transport maximum and renal threshold occur.
Okay, so before talking about saturation and all that stuff, I think it's important to know that glucose is transported through secondary active transport, meaning it takes energy, and it's also through a support with sodium because the sodium drags the glucose against its concentration gradient, which is why it needs the energy from the importer.
And then just some terms that we're going to be using a lot that are kind of important to know are saturation, which is, it refers to the maximum rate of transport that occurs when all available carriers are occupied or saturated with the substrate.
Such as glucose.
Yes.
TM is an abbreviation for transport maximum, which is the transport rate at maximum saturation, or at saturation. And then renal threshold is the plasma concentration at which glucose first appears in the urine. So that's kind of saying that when the saturation is reached, or there's not enough glucose transported anymore, they're all taken up. Glucose is then excreted in the urine, which is the renal threshold.
Yep, because the concentration got too high.
And we'll go more into that when we draw up the graphs.
Yeah.
And it's also, so just for layman's terms, like glucose excreted equals the glucose filtered minus the glucose that's reabsorbed. So how much is like taken out and then how much is put back in?
Yeah.
Whatever's left over is the excreted amount.
Yep.
Okay. Graphs.
So first Riley is going to draw just the filtration line, which is exponential because filtration does not saturate. Is there anything more to say about why it doesn't saturate? Maybe I'm just making that up. Okay, I guess not. Filtration just doesn't saturate because if it's all, well, that makes sense, just geologically.
It's
If it's always filtering, if it's always filtering, it's never going to get to a saturation point because it's always.
It's just always taking it out.
Exactly.
Yeah.
It's always going through the system.
It's
So that's that line.
a straight line because the filtrate glucose concentration is always equal to the plasma glucose concentration.
Right.
That's what it is. Straight from the book. And so that's this whole little yeah.
It's just
The next thing is reabsorption, and that is the glucose level starts at 0, and then it reaches its maximum transport maximum, which is at 375.
But that goes up
Yeah.
exponentially along the same slope as the filtration
Until
It re-
300.
yeah.
Well, yeah.
until 375 on
For the
this
reabsorption
axis.
and 300 plasma, 300 milligrams per 100 milliliters of plasma in the plasma glucose.
Yep.
Right, and that's the transport maximum.
which is just
Yes.
how fast the transporters can move
The
when
glucose.
they're saturated.
Right.
Yes.
Okay.
Right. And then we go to we'll talk about renal threshold. When is it's 0 until the glucose concentration reaches 300, and that's when there's too much glucose. The glucose concentration is too high, and with that, then it starts to show up in the urine because it can't be
Right.
transported anymore, so it has to be excreted.
Yep. Since we've reached the transport maximum, we cannot get any more out. We can't reabsorb anymore because the transporters can't move any faster. So once we reach that excess point, that is when we see the renal threshold met,
Right.
which is when we start to see glucose in the urine. And so then this is just the composite graph that shows, so here's the transport maximum, which is where we stop. We cannot get any more glucose out any faster. And so right here is how much it would be if we did not have a transport maximum, but we do. And then so this same vertice right here is where we see the renal threshold is met right there because now all of a sudden we're at a transport maximum. We can't get any more glucose back into the plasma, and so it starts to show up in the urine. at 300 milligrams per 100 milliliters of plasma.
What else? Just another point of interest, I guess. So when if plasma concentrations are low enough that 100% of the filtered glucose is reabsorbed, and then no glucose is excreted. So I guess I don't know how much more I can explain that.
I guess it's also worth noting that excretion equals filtration minus reabsorption. So how much you put into the kidney and how much you take back out of the kidney, you subtract those, and then you get how much is excreted in the urine.
Yep.
Also, fun vocab word, excretion of glucose in the urine is called glucosuria or glycosuria.